Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger. Welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Today is February 10th, 2021, and we're seeing some extraordinary developments in the United States of chaos, of circus-type environment around the impeachment. Helga, what's your best reading of what's going on around this situation?
Well, it is a circus, but let me say something optimistic in the beginning, because you have three Mars missions. One already is in orbit from the UAW, another one today from China, and then still another one from the United States on the 18th. So that shows you where mankind should be going. But before we come to that, let's look at what needs to be overcome. And one of those situations is exactly what you are referring to, the unbelievable situation in the United States. I think, looking at it from a distance, so to speak, I think it's a very, very dangerous development, because you have a clear effort to declare former President Trump a non-person. You have a trampling on the Constitution. Yesterday, 56 senators voted for impeachment, which means they don't respect the Constitution, because the Constitution says you can only impeach a sitting president or official, but not a former one. And it is clearly designed to, completely, confuse the population, brainwash the population. It will increase the polarization, and the whole thing is phony, because there is now plenty of evidence that the storm on the Capitol was planned long before the 6th of January. Probably immediately after the election took place, there were preparations. The FBI has now evidence that there were 200 people whom they somehow arrested on the January 6th, who were involved in the pre-planning. Some of these people were FBI informants or had high-level security clearance from the FBI, like the head of, or some of the people from the Proud Boys, and also the so-called Oath Keeper head, Caldwell or Caldwell, whatever his name is. So, this is a sting operation, if you ever have seen one. And, it is clearly designed to, make sure that Trump never can run for office again. So the whole thing is fraudulent. But you have to see it in the context of other things which are going on in the United States as well. And that is censorship. What we had seen already beginning against then President Trump, when he gave press conferences, the major TV stations intervened and said, no, we don't agree with the content of what he's saying, overriding and overruling the President of the United States. Now you have a whole pattern of blogs and websites are being banned by the social media. You cannot mention certain words anymore. If you say vote fraud, you are being banned. If you say, certain other things which don't fit the official narrative. So it completely suppresses any kind of open discussion and the First Amendment. And then you have this very worrisome effort to criminalize the Trump base. Naturally, one is against violence of any kind. But when the former CIA station chief of from Iraq and I think Afghanistan, a person called Grenier, says one has to use the same methods one used against counterinsurgencies in Afghanistan and Iraq against those domestic terrorists, because they swim in a larger environment of support in the population. I mean, this is really incredible. I mean, this should upset any person who loves democracy for that matter, or freedom. And I think it is creating an atmosphere of real, I think McCarthyism is a mild word for saying it, and it's a very dangerous development. So, I can only call on all people to, keep a free debate, keep an open truth seeking of matters, and I think it's a very dangerous development. That's all I can say.
What I find interesting is that parallel to what's being done against Trump and the Trump supporters is the escalation for regime change in Russia against Putin, which sort of goes back to the whole issue of Russiagate being targeting both the United States and Russia. What's the latest you have on this anti-Putin move?
Well, this Navalny story is really a concoction. I mean, first of all, we should remember that Navalny was not very known in Russia until recently, until this so-called poisoning through the Russian government was supposedly happening. As a matter of fact, if you look at his older statements, he is a right-wing person. He called some people cockroaches, and using a language which we know from Germany from 80 years ago. So he's not exactly a hero or a nice person, but he is being used to absolutely go for street demonstrations to finance those. There is this video which was published by RT where one of his top campaign managers, Vladimir Arshukov, is seen in 2012, where he talks to a member of the British embassy, which in reality was an MI6 agent, where Arshukov asks this British so-called diplomat for 10 to 20 million dollar a year, because that would enable them to organize mass demonstrations in Russia. So, this is the reality of this operation. And Maria Zakharova just said in a press conference that it is very clear that there are powerful circles behind Navalny from the West, and some of them demonstrated in these street demonstrations, members from the embassies from Germany, from Poland, and from Sweden, which is going against any statutes and standards of the diplomatic service. So Russia expelled these individuals. Then, in a reciprocal move, these countries expelled a Russian diplomat. But then the thing was really crowned by an unbelievably provocative event, which just took place in Brussels in the mission of the Polish mission, with EU participation, but also UK, US, and Canada. And they basically discussed with Arshukov and also another person whose name I just forgot, Volkov, who's another person from the Navalny team, and they discussed how all these countries should respond together to the jailing of Navalny. So this is a real intelligence operation, and it is aimed to create an environment where you have internal opposition emerging against Putin, and it has the same character like what we discussed last week, the paper of the Atlantic Council targeting Xi Jinping for regime change. Now, needless to say that if from one nuclear power and the EU, they are running regime change operations against the other two major nuclear powers, this is really very, very dangerous. And I think that it's completely disgusting. I think then also the foreign minister, so-called, of the EU, Joseph Borrell, went to Moscow. He had discussions with Lavrov. Supposedly they were very relaxed and friendly, but when Borrell went back to Brussels, he gave a press conference, and said that he mainly discussed Navalny and the question of human rights, so that then Lavrov basically said that there are two stories. One is what Borrell said when he was in Moscow, and another one is what he said when he was back in Brussels. So who is running EU foreign policy? Lavrov also said, and this is extremely worrisome, that Germany would have opened secret files to Navalny when he was in Germany making this so-called movie about the luxury palace of Putin. With other words, that the German secret services gave Navalny files, which is extremely provocative. And it turns out now that this so-called luxury palace has been empty for many years. Putin was never in it, and it is being restored to become a hotel. But it was manipulated with Photoshop methods to look as a luxury hotel. So these are these methods, which are really pre-war, creating an enemy image of a country. And I think it's completely disgusting. Even more disgusting is that the German Foreign Minister Maas spent 21 million, obviously, of taxpayer money to finance the opposition in Belarus. Now, I don't know, this all is really counterproductive and it should be denounced. It's a kind of, warmongering, and any clear-thinking citizen should really distance himself or herself from these kinds of operations.
And you mentioned the Atlantic Council paper targeting Xi Jinping. There's also the commander of STRATCOM, the Strategic Command for the Nuclear Defense of the United States, talking about the likelihood of war. And the Chinese are continuing to very strongly discuss that. At the same time, they're holding open the possibility of a better relationship. What's your reading on that?
Well, there was a very interesting article in People's Daily where the author makes the point that, if the United States is worried about a nuclear war, then the easiest thing not to have it is not to make a strike against China or Russia, because it is China's policy under all circumstances to have a no first nuclear strike policy. And as you say, they again and again say now is the time to have a new definition of the relationship between the United States and China. So it is very clear that the warmongering comes not from Russia and China, and I think people should not fall into this trap, because once you are in a dynamic where you keep shouting negative things, you get a reaction. And the Global Times chief editor in one editorial answered and said, well, no, obviously China must increase its nuclear arsenal and build at least 1,000 ICBMs to be credible. But that is the kind of reaction you get. And I think the world is really confronted with so many real problems that, this kind of geopolitical warmongering is really more superfluous than anything else on this planet.
One of the real problems that we've been focused on is the push for this Green New Deal, a global green economy, a green financial bubble. And this just continues to unfold with Biden's initial executive orders. But there is a real reaction against it from certain countries. How is this developing over the last week?
Well, it is a bubble, as we discussed many times. The financial system is hopelessly bankrupt. The central banks have pumped money, trillions and trillions, into the system since 2008, when you already had a systemic crisis. And it is very clear this cannot be maintained forever. So in one sense, this idea to pump another $30 trillion into the system for green investments, which will ruin the economy. If you go to these low energy flux density levels, you cannot maintain a modern industrial power. And it is really a last ditch effort to bail out the banks, to bail out the speculators, and it is more than cynical. I mean, one aspect is this is unbelievable that the EU, otherwise famous for their pushback operation in the context of Frontex, which shows you, what the mindset is of these bureaucrats. But what they have now done is they made agreements with 31 African countries to produce mass scale solar and wind energy and turn it into hydrogen, ship the hydrogen then from Africa back to Europe. Because if you go all green technology and energy in Europe, you cannot build as many wind parks, one shouldn't call them parks, wind offshore and onshore wind hubs and solar panels in Europe, because it would cover the entire territory with these things. So what they are planning to do is to import 80% of their energy from these operations in Africa. Now, obviously, the African nations are, poor, and they are desperate for all kinds of deals. But it ruins the environment in Africa. It means no industrial development is what they really would need. And it just shows you the absolutely cynical character of this green policy, which one can only call an eco dictatorship, and in reality eco-fascism, because it does reduce the population capacity of the earth, and therefore one can call it an eco-fascist policy for sure.
And one thing we're seeing in Europe, particularly in Germany, is rising prices for electricity and also a new wave of layoffs. I mean, this is also pretty troubling.
Yeah, the economy is collapsing. You have massive layoffs in all major industries, Thyssen, MRN, and various others, but also many small and medium industries go bankrupt. And the energy prices increase. I think there was alone in January in Germany energy price increase of 7.5%. And once all of these schemes are being implemented, it will get worse and worse. And the idea behind it is what the Greens have discussed since a long time: to change the behavior of the population by increasing the prices such that most people cannot afford electric devices or warm heating or going by by train somewhere. So it is really an absolute imposition of massive austerity policy de facto in respect to the living standard of the population. So we should really fight against it. We will bring out tomorrow Executive Intelligence Review will publish a special report on the Green Deal, on the Great Reset. And I can only encourage our viewers to get this report, because this is designed to explain to people, what will be the effect of such a policy and what can be done against it.
Now, the other thing we should take up is this whole question of what went wrong in Europe in particular with the vaccines, what Ursula von der Leyen did to make it impossible for people to get vaccinated in many European countries. But at the same time, the Russian vaccine, which everyone was scoffing at and making fun of, now is becoming almost a prize for the Russians. What can you say about this?
Well, it is very clear that the EU, I mean, that's now being discussed everywhere, that the EU does not care about its member states and the population. So they were falling behind very massively in ordering vaccine. And now, there is a recognition that if Europeans are supposed to be vaccinated, they better buy vaccines from Russia and China. So even Alexander Dobrindt from the CSU said, that this is what should be done. And I think even Merkel talked with Putin and also with Xi Jinping. So I think this is underway. But naturally, if you look at China, they have now said that they will donate vaccines to 53 developing countries. And in addition to that, they made agreements for sale of vaccines to another 22 countries. They have developed altogether 6 vaccines. And I think, all the slanders against China are really contradicted by what is happening in terms of deeds. So I think there is a clear tendency to recognize that all these accusations against China are completely ill-founded.
So I find it interesting. We started with the question of the Mars missions, which I know we'll talk about in just a moment. But at the same time, we're seeing the potential that exists in Russia and China for scientific breakthroughs that are of benefit to the whole world. And of course, in the United States as well, the vaccine program is moving ahead, although there are problems. But let's go back now to this question of Mars. This is really extraordinary. This is a big week. I don't know if there's an air traffic control system on Mars, but there's a lot of incoming spaceships, aren't there?
Yeah, I think this is really exciting because, yesterday the orbiter Hope from the UAW, no, the UAE, I'm sorry, the United Arab Emirates, arrived at the orbit of Mars, and they will basically make pictures, images of weather patterns of Mars for future expeditions. So this is very exciting because, if you look at some of the pictures from the laboratories in the United Arab Emirates, I mean, you see all these men and women, the men dressed in their typical Islamic Arabic dresses or garb, and I mean, it's just such a completely different image about the future of the Arab world. Now, the last time the Arab world was in the forefront of science was in the Abbasid dynasty. This was around the time of Harun al-Rashid, al-Mansur, al-Mamun. And at that time, Baghdad was the most advanced science city in the world. The caliphs gave gold for everybody who would bring a discovery, from Egypt, from Spain, from Italy, and weigh them in gold. And this time, the head of the space agency of the Arab Emirates said that they choose one of the most difficult missions, namely a Mars mission, because they thought that the challenge should be such that it would provoke the greatest leap forward and leapfrogging in terms of science and technology. And you know what the average age is of these engineers? 27 years. And 1/3 of them are women. So if there's any way, to catch up with the future and modern world, it is exactly that. And, they quote especially a poet whose name I have now forgotten, but he was born in 915, and they quote him with saying that if you want to pick a challenge, look up to the stars. So I think this is very beautiful. And, as I said, today is the Tianwen-1 orbiter has reached the orbit of Mars. It will be there for a while, and then they will plan very carefully the landing on Mars. I think it will happen in 3 months, but then they have a lander and a rover. So this will be a very carefully pre-planned operation. And then on the 18th of this month, you will have the Perseverance operation from NASA, also a lander and a rover rather. So I think this idea, that the future of mankind is the colonization of space, and that the best thing which could happen is that all countries work together. The way to overcome geopolitical conflict on Earth is to start to really reach for the stars, to colonize Moon and Mars and prepare for future interstellar travel of mankind as one. I mean, if you look at mankind from space, you see that our little blue planet is very small, it's very fragile, and the universe is incredibly big. We have not discovered the first secrets yet. I mean, there's so much to discover in 2 trillion galaxies, which we know for sure to exist. So that it's really time to overcome what I call the infancy of mankind, where people squabble over territory. And, if we go for space science, we can completely transform, everything which is called a resource. And, the conflicts now, which seem to be so big, will completely vanish once we reach the next phase, at the next era of human civilization. So I think this is good reason for optimism.
This, of course, is in keeping with your late husband's life work to have that kind of cooperation, what your friend Croft Erica called the extraterrestrial imperative. And we should note that we're coming up on the 2nd year anniversary of Lyndon LaRouche's passing. And there will be on the website 24 hours of videotapes for people to become more familiar with Lyndon LaRouche. Now, Helga, also just to conclude, in terms of addressing the geopolitical crisis, the Schiller Institute is sponsoring a roundtable this weekend to discuss the situation in Russia. Do you want to say something about that?
Yes, this will be a roundtable of experts. We already have very renowned speakers. Senator Mike Gravel, I think, agreed. Then Professor Lozansky from the American University in Moscow. We also have possibly Mr. Greiner, the author of the book on Bill Browder, possibly another expert from Russia, maybe Ray McGovern. So it will be a very important round of people to discuss both what's behind this operation and why the truth has to be gotten out to neutralize it. So you should all tune in on Saturday. I think it's 2 p.m. Eastern American time, East Coast time. So see you then.
1 p.m. Eastern time this time. And I think people definitely would find it not just fascinating, but crucial to address the crises we've been discussing. So Helga, thanks for joining us. And I guess we'll see you again next week.
Till next week.
Okay.